world is a horrible place. If I've learned anything in my 20 years as a homicide detective, it's that. Most people ignore it, but murders and stomach-turning acts of violence happen every day. It helps a little knowing you're doing good, helping people, but it's just a band-aid. It's not enough to make up for all the awful things you have to see. I've seen so many mothers cry over their children. I can't even remember them all. I've witnessed men, totally normal-seeming guys you might walk past on any street in America, promise to, quote, gut me just like they did that. Maybe I'm weak. Maybe I'm too sensitive, but I was losing it. I'd started coming home later and later, not wanting to face my wife, Elena, and lie to her, saying that everything was fine. And where did I spend all this time when I was supposed to be at home? At a bar, of course. It's a cliched and humiliating story, but that's what happened. It took a DUI charge, a psych eval, and that disappointed look in my wife's eyes when she came to bail me out of jail to finally snap me out of my fugue. My job was killing me. I quit that day. I worked on getting sober and being more honest with Elena. Still, I couldn't leave that world entirely. Our kids may have moved on to bigger and better things, but we still had a mortgage to pay and retirement to save for. Investigative work was just about the only skill I had. So, I got a private detective's license, breezing through the requirements on the back of my police training. And yeah, you still saw some of the dregs of human society as a PI. Bail skippers, parents who basically kidnap their kids by breaking custody agreements, and cheating spouses. It wasn't fun, but it was a heck of a lot better than the cloud of gore and misery that followed homicide detectives around like a curse. Another advantage was being able to set my own hours, meaning I had time to help Elena out by doing the occasional grocery run. I was standing in front of 50 different brands of bread, trying to remember which one my wife had asked me to get, when my phone rang. It was the woman herself. I answered. "Hey, hon," I said. "Did you want whole wheat or honey oat bread?"
"Derek, there's someone here for you. A client. Can you come home?"
A client? I'd never had anyone drop by my house. I mostly did video and phone calls to get the necessary details from clients, and I'd usually mail them my results. Sure, my website had my address on it, but that was strictly for clients to mail me things they couldn't email. I didn't like that my wife was alone at home with a stranger. "I'm on my way," I said, just picking up the closest loaf of bread and rushing through checkout. I forced myself to keep my driving safe, but my palms were sweating a bit, and my foot twitched occasionally, wanting to press down on the accelerator. I had a bad feeling about this. "Elena, I'm home," I called as I walked through our front door, carrying our groceries. Elena wandered over from the direction of the sitting room, a tight, worried expression on her face. She kissed my cheek and took the groceries from me. "She's in there," she said, gesturing toward the room she'd just left. I nodded and gave her shoulder a squeeze. With one last uncertain look, Elena took the groceries into the kitchen while I made my way to our sitting room. Sitting on our sofa was a middle-aged woman, a little younger than me, maybe, with dark hair and a careworn face, already gazing intently at me as I crossed the threshold. Her blue eyes were a little watery, but her expression was firm and clear. As I walked over to her and extended my hand, I noticed that she had a small, white box on her lap. It was wide enough to fit printer paper inside and maybe a foot tall. She moved the box to her side and stood to shake my hand. Her grip was solid, something I always noted when I met someone new. People with strong handshakes have strong personalities, I've found. "Hello, miss," I asked. Albright," she said. "Cora Albright." "It's nice to meet you, Miss Albright. I must say, I don't usually meet clients face to face at my home." "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry. When I decided I wanted to hire you, I just started driving. I didn't even realize what I was doing until I pulled up in front of your house. I didn't even make an appointment. I sat down in the chair I'd bought before getting married. Elena had since reupholstered it with a more feminine floral print. Whatever. It felt the same to sit down in. So, what do you want to hire me for? I figured it was something to do with a cheating husband. No, she wasn't angry enough for that. I'm a writer, she said. Oh? I said, a little taken aback by the sudden shift in topic. She nodded. True crime, mostly. Articles, a book or two. Nothing revolutionary. I read an article about you. Really? I'd given a few interviews here and there, and occasionally I got clients through them. Yes, I was actually thinking of writing my first mystery novel at the time. I was doing research and came across a profile about your career as an investigator and why you decided to become a private detective. I thought you might be a good person to base a character around. First time I'd heard that. Thank you? Her eyes flicked to mine. She pinned me to the back of my chair with her stare before she sighed and picked up the little box she'd brought with her. Miss Albright seemed to consider something before delicately lifting the lid and placing it next to her. I want you to find out who killed my daughter. The oxygen immediately got sucked out of the room. My tie felt tight around my neck, and the casual, tastefully decorated sitting room suddenly seemed hideous and wrong, like it was a false front. Miss Albright shuffled through the papers in the box and passed me one. It was a photocopy of a newspaper article. The title read, Stitcher Strikes Again, in big, bold black lettering. There was what I assumed to be a school picture of Miss Albright's daughter embedded in the text. She had the same dark hair and light eyes. I'm sorry I have to ask, but who's this Stitcher? Miss Albright cocked her head, clearly not ready for the question. I'm sorry for my husband, a voice called from behind me. It was Elena, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee on it. She handed one to me, then to Miss Albright. Ever since retiring, he tries to avoid crime stories if he can help it. I see. The Stitcher, Elena continued, is a serial killer who targets young women. He uses a needle and thread to stitch his victims' faces together. Mouth, eyes, nose, everything. He's been on the news everywhere lately. Miss Albright went pale and held a hand over her mouth, but she held firm and said nothing. Elena gave Miss Albright an empathetic smile and left the room, leaving me alone with her once again. I understand why you'd want to come to see me, I started. You want to do everything you can for your daughter. I'm a father, I get that feeling. But I'm not sure what I can add to a full-blown police investigation. They have resources and manpower. The police aren't investigating my daughter's murder. Excuse me? She's no longer considered a victim of the Stitcher. Miss Albright looked into the box and began digging through it, this time producing a different article. She slid it across our coffee table over to me. Alleged Stitcher victim ruled accidental death after investigation, it read. I raised an eyebrow. Knowing the serial killer's murder method, how in the world had something so violent and torturous been ruled an accident? I can tell that you have the same question I do, Miss Albright said. I read the article in full and discovered the reason for the ruling. For a start, Maggie had a pretty solid security system protecting her house. It offered a full 360-degree view of her property, and no one had been seen even approaching her house, let alone entering it, at the time of her death. Additionally, the system hadn't detected any break-ins. Inside the house, there were no signs of struggle anywhere. Aside from the stitching wounds themselves, Maggie bore no defensive marks. In fact, based on the blood spatter at the scene, she hadn't even gotten up from her chair during the ordeal, despite a lack of restraints. Furthermore, the forensics team found no trace of an intruder. Not a fiber, a skin cell, a hair, a fingerprint, or a footprint. A toxicology report revealed that, unlike the Stitcher's other victims, Maggie hadn't been sedated either. It was presumed that if she were conscious and being attacked, she would have fought back. A fair presumption. Left with no possible way someone could have murdered Maggie, the coroner's office had been forced to rule the death as a very bizarre sequence of unfortunate events. A sudden, psychotic break caused Maggie, influenced by the recent reporting on the Stitcher, to mutilate herself, which led to her death. Though the wounds themselves weren't fatal, Maggie's heart had stopped sometime after the sewing was complete. The cause was uncertain, perhaps shock. I put the article down and leaned back in my chair, hands laced together behind my head. Miss Albright simply sipped at her coffee, letting me come to my conclusion in my own time. As I saw it, there were three broad possibilities. The first was that an intruder somehow made it past Maggie's security team undetected, overpowered her, killed her, and then left, leaving no trace of themselves. Unlikely, bordering on impossible. The second was that, as tragic as it was, Maggie Albright had essentially committed suicide. There was no evidence to suggest she had been forced to do what she did. And though it was surprising and strange things happen every day. This was just one of them. This would be strange for two reasons. One, it was really hard to imagine someone choosing such a torturous method to harm themselves. Maggie sewed her whole face up. The pain must have been excruciating, and though not always the case, I'd often found instances of self-harm to be impulsive, not planned and carried out over an extended period of time, like this had been. Second, her heart just stopped. I'd seen people take far more threatening injuries and carry on joking with paramedics like it was no big deal. Every person is different, but I'd love to read a full autopsy report if I had the chance. The cause of death was a bit of a question mark for me. Finally, there was the possibility that someone had influenced or coerced Maggie into doing what she did. Perhaps someone had threatened her somehow, or drugged her with something undetectable that made her suggestible or severely compromised her decision-making capacity. I wasn't even sure how this could be possible. It would certainly take some kind of arcane setup and probably couldn't have been precisely directed. Mulling over each possibility, I had to agree with the investigators that the accidental death explanation was the most likely cause of Maggie's death. I couldn't even really fathom how someone would have pulled off the other two. Still, something in my gut told me there was more to this story than met the eye. But was it even my place to investigate it? Though I'd gone through a lot in my head, not much time had passed in reality. Perhaps a minute or two. I unlaced my hands and leaned forward in my seat, making eye contact with Miss Albright. Sensing I'd made my decision, Miss Albright set her coffee cup down on our table. I wanted to say no. Doing this would cause me and my family nothing but pain. I'd quit police work for a reason. Then I thought about my kids, and how I'd feel if one of them had died this way. I sighed. God damn it. This isn't something I can do alongside other things. It'll have to take up my full attention. Miss Albright held my gaze, but didn't say anything. I'd have to be blunter. This will be expensive, I mean. She nodded and said, "That's fine. I may not find anything. I've made my peace with that. I may end up agreeing with the official report. In fact, I believe it's the likeliest explanation based off what I know now." Miss Albright hesitated, then sighed. It may have sounded a little cruel, but I had to be sure she was ready for this, for whatever result I found. I'd investigate, but I wasn't going to lie about Maggie's death to appease her. I won't say it's okay, but I will respect your conclusion if that's what you end up thinking. But I will never believe my daughter did that to herself. Okay, I said. Now, I'll need everything you have on her. Access to accounts, messages, mail, info on her social circle and personality, physical and mental health records, the works. It's all in there, Miss Albright said, gesturing to the box. I've also left my business card, so you can call me for progress reports or if you need anything else. Maggie's house key is in there too. I haven't been able to No one's been in there since the investigation finished. I can't go in there, but I can't seem to bring myself to sell it either. I can't imagine other people walking through her house, living the life she was supposed to. I understand. I'll be respectful. With that, we discussed mundane details like payment and what to expect, but it wasn't long before I escorted Miss Albright to her car. Elena was waiting for me when I walked back inside. She bore an expression I recognized from back in my police officer days. It was her, "I want to disapprove of your decision, but also support you" face. I'd made her make it all the time when I was investigating grisly murders every other week. It was the first time since I'd retired that I'd seen it. "I'm sorry," I said. "I looked into her eyes, thought about our kids, and I couldn't bring myself to refuse." "I know," Elena said. "That's why you shouldn't do it. You're too kind for this, just like you were too kind to be a homicide detective." It's an argument she'd made many times. I didn't have a good answer, so I just kissed her temple and held her close. First thing the next morning, I drove out to Maggie's place. I wanted to see where and how she lived and, though it was unlikely I'd find anything, poke around for clues investigators might have missed. It was just a little under 2 hours away, which was a hassle, but at least I didn't have to take a flight. Honestly, if he or she was operating so close to my home, it surprised me I hadn't heard of this Stitcher before. The cursory research I'd done told me that this was a national news story. Maybe I'd been a little too thorough in my efforts to distance myself from crime reporting. I shouldn't do it to the point where I missed out on national events. Anyway, Maggie's house was a charming suburban home painted light blue with white accents. The kind of place you'd never imagine a horrific crime occurring. Someone had been mowing the yard, but the shrubs were unkempt and looking a little wilted. Her mailbox was full to bursting, so I grabbed a stack of letters and ads and let myself in using the key Miss Albright had given me. The first thing I noticed was the smell. The house stank to high heaven. Of course, crime cleanup crews had already come through and cleaned the scene after forensics had finished. But when Miss Albright said no one else had been inside the house since Maggie's death, she meant it. Food was rotting in the fridge and the cabinets. Every step toward the kitchen was like pushing through another solid wall of stench. I opened all the windows and tossed out everything rotting. By the time I was done, the smell had either receded or I'd gotten used to it. My head clear, I sat down with the mail at the kitchen table, where Maggie had been found slumped over. It was mostly advertisements, bills, and menus for nearby takeout places. But here was one personal letter. It was from someone named Matthew Thomas. What a generic name. Perhaps too generic. It would be difficult to find someone by that name just because so many other people were called that too. Even though Miss Albright had given me permission to go through any and all of Maggie's things, I still felt a pang of guilt opening the letter. I wouldn't want some stranger rummaging through my personal effects after I died. The contents were totally normal. It was responding to a conversation they'd been having about Western films they liked and restaurants they'd recently eaten at. It was a pretty archaic form of communication these days, especially for a young woman like Maggie, but the subject matter itself wasn't strange, except for the postscript. P.S. Did you like your present? I bet you looked sharp. Sharp. That word unnerved me. A coincidence or... While there wasn't much of a romantic undertone to the letter, I still wondered if Maggie might have kept some previous letters. I walked up the stairs to her bedroom to look for them. It was littered with dead plants, ivy, flowers, a fern, all dead. The cacti were still hanging tough, though. Once again feeling that inkling of guilt, I opened drawers, rifling through the life Maggie Albright had lived. I tried to leave her wardrobe for last, hoping I'd find something useful before then, but no such luck. I had to search her sock and underwear drawer before I found anything. My hand hit something, not fabric, but paper. Bingo. It was a stack of envelopes. Not many, just 3 or so. Still, stashing envelopes in your underwear drawer? If the relationship wasn't romantic, I'd wager Maggie had wanted it to be. The old letters were similar to the first, but there was no mention of a present. The police had almost certainly found these letters, but with it being seemingly impossible for anyone to enter the house without being spotted, they probably hadn't looked into them. Most investigations had to be careful about where they allocated their resources. All right, no more putting it off. I had to get in touch with one of my old buddies on the force. I'd wanted to delete the number, but I'd never had the heart to. I punched in his name and pressed call. It rang once, twice, a third time. Maybe he was away or just didn't want to speak to me.
I'm surprised to hear from you, Derek.
Brian, my old partner, said when the call finally connected. Hey, Brian.
What is it you said to me the last time we spoke? I was saying to keep in touch, and you said something like, I'm sorry, but I have to make a clean break. Isn't that right?
My stomach sank. It was the right choice at the time, but it had still hurt to cut out all my friends and colleagues. I had to step away from that world fully for my own sanity, but cutting ties hadn't been fun. I'm sorry, was all I could say. He sighed, a bitter, angry sigh. Still, he stayed on the line.
What do you want?
I'm working on a case.
That's right, you went private. Well, I'm not on the cheating husband's beat, sorry.
It's not a cheating husband. I'm looking into the death of Maggie Albright. A silence on the other end of the line.
Who the fuck are you working for?
Brian asked.
No, don't tell me. I can guess. The mother, right? And here I was, glad when she finally stopped calling. The kid accidentally offed herself, Derek. There's nothing else that makes sense.
I agree with you. Okay, I didn't totally agree with him, but he didn't have to know that. I just want to convince Miss Albright of that. Another silence, longer this time. It stretched on for 10 seconds at least, a huge gap for a conversation to pause.
Talk,
Brian spat out. Did you find the letters?
Yeah, we found the letters, asshole. The department didn't fall apart without you. We looked into them a bit. We didn't find the sender. But when we determined that no one could have entered the crime scene unseen, we dropped it.
Just as I'd thought. There was another letter from the guy in Maggie's mailbox. He mentions a present. Did you guys find any wrapping or something brand new that could have been a present? Something that she was wearing, perhaps?
I don't have the evidence list in front of me, but no. I don't remember anything like that.
Something told me if I asked him to go get it, he'd just hang up. So I moved on. There's always something.
What do you mean?
At a crime scene, there's always something that just doesn't quite fit the narrative, right? Something that doesn't align with our interpretation of the facts. If there wasn't, defense attorneys would be out of jobs. What was it this time? Brian sighed again.
I wish you'd have stayed with us, man.
I know. I wish I could have. I think in that moment, he forgave me for leaving and not staying in contact because he passed on some details I'm sure he wasn't supposed to.
There were two things. First, the body. Well, all of the bodies. It's something we've kept out of the press. The victims of the Stitcher, their bodies are all dried out, like mummies. Part of his kill method, we think. Or an attempt at preserving the body. Each corpse is riddled with desiccating chemicals. But not only was the kid's body like that as well, odd if it was really an accidental death, but there was also no evidence of any chemicals in her body that could have caused it. The techs are still puzzled by that one.
Interesting. So, the state of her body pointed to her being a victim of the serial killer, because only the police knew that the bodies were dried out. But the apparent absence of a cause, which was present in the other bodies, threw that into question. And the other? I asked.
We never found it. It should have been there, but we couldn't find it.
What?
The needle, man. If she stitched herself up, then it should have been right there on the table, or dropped on the floor or something. But it wasn't.
No needle, huh? what was it the letter had said?
I bet you looked sharp.
Yeah, the world's really a horrible place, isn't it? It'd been a few weeks since I'd stood in Maggie's apartment and learned that her death might not have been an accident after all. Since then, I'd almost exclusively focused on locating this Matthew Thomas, who had been sending her letters. I pored over them, looking for any clue that might lead me to him. A job, a street address, anything. I didn't find anything like that, but I did notice one thing. There was no indication that Maggie had ever written him back. Sure, Matthew spoke conversationally, but I noted that when you read his letters in chronological order, none of them mentioned anything specific Maggie had said. No stories about her life, her personal interests, her family, nothing like that. The guy was basically talking to himself. Perhaps he was a stalker, and Maggie had been saving the letters as evidence. If so, she hadn't told her mother. Miss Albright surely would have mentioned it to me if she'd known. I had already been getting a grimy, uneasy feeling about this guy, and this realization only confirmed that hunch. This was further reinforced when he proved incredibly difficult to track down. As I expected, there were dozens of Matthew Thomases spread around the city and outlying suburbs, and the name was certainly an alias. Still, just because a name's an alias doesn't mean you can't track down the person behind it. A trail under a false name is still a trail after all. Most people who use an alias do so with a particular goal in mind, usually to hide their real name for whatever reason. For criminals, the reason is obvious. It makes it harder to trace their illegal activity. The point isn't to build a whole new identity. It's just to provide a bit of smokescreen in front of their actual one. In terms of public records, you can spot an alias from a mile away, once you know what to look for. They'll seem to appear out of nowhere one day, with nothing registered in their name for decades, only to suddenly pop up to buy a home, a car, a storage locker, and more, all within the span of a year. They'll almost never have any social media, and you'll never find more than 1 or 2 photos of the supposed person, if any at all. So that's what I've been doing over the past 3 weeks. I was going over the historical record, as it were, of the Matthew Thomases who lived in our area. Anyone with a long, credible history of existence was ruled out. People who answered the phone as Matthew Thomas when I pretended to be their cable provider, ruled out, and so on, until I had just one name left to cross off my list. The only evidence of this Matthew's existence I could find was an apartment registered under his name. He was a total ghost beyond that. If this wasn't the guy who had been writing Maggie those letters, it'd be back to the drawing board. That's how I ended up in front of a decaying apartment complex, all cracked gray concrete and stained windows, trying to gather my courage to knock on the last Mr. Thomas's door. I was an idiot, of course. I was looking for a serial killer who had killed 5 women, including Maggie, in absolutely horrific fashion. It would be foolish to just waltz into his den without a plan. I called Brian. "Hey, I need a favor." I expected him to give me a hard time, but something in my tone must have convinced him not to.
What do you need?
"I've narrowed down the possible letter senders to just one. I'm standing outside his apartment building now."
By yourself?
Brian said. I heard the scrape of a chair as he stood up, probably at his desk. "Yeah,"
Williams, get over here now.
Brian yelled. I recognized the name. It was good to know Williams was still with the force.
Look, Derek, just wait there for us. Do not go into that apartment by yourself, okay? What's the address?
"I thought you said there was no way Maggie's death was anything but an accident."
I've been looking over the letter you sent me, the one about the present. I've been thinking about how we couldn't find the needle and the dried out state of the body. Too much doesn't fit. Maybe you're onto something. Maybe it was more than an accident.
Brian had always been a good detective. I'd hoped he'd reach the same conclusion I had if I sent him the final Matthew Thomas letter. "Good to know. Here's where I'm at," I said. reciting the address to him.
Williams, pull a car around front, will you?
There were some mumbles from Williams.
I'll explain in a minute. Just do it. Derek, you still there?
Yes.
We'll be there in 40 minutes. Wait for us, okay? Don't you dare walk into a serial killer's lair alone, all right?
Sure.
He hung up, leaving me alone facing the building. I started walking toward the entrance. I hadn't called Brian so we could investigate together, per se. Instead, I knew I might have to employ some legally dubious tactics to gain entry to the apartment. Cops don't do that kind of thing. Well, the good ones don't anyway. I wanted them to show up later and be my backup just in case something went wrong. Not to mention, sharing evidence with Miss Albright would be difficult if the police got hold of it first. The only reason Brian had helped me by passing on evidence was because he thought Maggie's death was unrelated to the serial murders. That wouldn't be the case this time. It was a balance of probabilities, but it was the best I had. The entryway was lit by those long, fluorescent bulbs that always reminded me of a high school classroom. There was a small mailroom attached to the lobby and a bulletin board for residents and management to post notices. Apparently, they were having the pipes redone next month, and Mrs. Jefferson's cat had gone missing again. I glanced over it briefly, but there was nothing that might have been from Matthew Thomas. Though I knew which apartment number was his, I didn't immediately take the elevator to his place on the 7th floor. Instead, I looked for the office. It was tucked away at the back of the building, through a narrow corridor I presumed was mostly used by maintenance staff. Luckily, there was a man seated at the desk. He was tall and thinly built with a thick mustache, browsing through a magazine with a woman in sort of bondage setup. I didn't even know they still printed magazines like that. Wasn't everything you could ever want on the internet these days? I cleared my throat and knocked on the door frame. The man jolted, opened a desk drawer, and shoved the magazine inside. His face turned bright red with embarrassment. Well, what did he expect, looking at pornography at work?
Yes, hello. How can I help you?
The man stuttered.
I'm Detective Sanderson.
I flashed the sleeve holding my badge and ID, both now out of date, and quickly stuffed it back into my pocket, hoping he wouldn't ask questions.
I'm here to interview someone regarding a serious crime. Can you point me to the right place?
The man was too flustered to question me, so he simply ummed and ahed his way to agreeing to show me the apartment. He dug through some file folders and produced a set of keys to Matthew Thomas's apartment. Perfect. Just as I'd hoped. As we waited in awkward silence for the elevator, the man, who I presumed to be the building manager, asked,
So, what did he do? The guy in 703, what did he do? Oh, nothing. We just want to talk to him as a potential witness.
The elevator dinged and the doors opened. We stepped in, and the conversation died as the elevator slowly lifted us, eventually stopping on floor 7. In front of Matthew Thomas's apartment, I knocked on the door. No answer.
He's not usually home during the day, I don't think. Can you open the door?
The man hesitated.
Well, do you have a warrant?
Damn. Had I pushed my luck too far? I was already skating on thin ice. It doesn't matter if you're an ex-cop. Impersonating a peace officer is a felony. If the manager pushed back too much, I'd be in trouble. Well, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Sure, that's fair. I'll go get a warrant. Maybe I'll get one for the whole building and bring a squad of guys to search through every nook and cranny looking for anything to bust anyone on. Would that be to your preference? Okay, geez,
the manager said, taking out the key ring and unlocking the door for me. I stepped past the threshold into a completely empty apartment. Not just no one was there, but the apartment, at least the front room, was completely empty.
You said someone was living here?
I asked, turning to the manager.
Well, I mean, yeah, I thought so,
he said.
Someone's been paying the rent, and I've seen a guy going in and out of the apartment, so...
Had he caught wind of my investigation and left? I couldn't think of how he would have. It's not like Elena or Brian would have leaked information. Perhaps the killer felt that the police were closing in on him, so he'd packed up. After all, there were other murders being investigated. The police may have made a breakthrough on their end.
What did the guy look like? Him? Sandy blonde hair, tanned skin, about as tall as me. He had those smile things. What are they called? Dimples? Yeah, that's it.
I poked through the other rooms, but the only thing in them was a thin layer of dust. What to do? I should probably call Brian and tell him to abandon the search. No need for the cavalry to arrive when there was nothing to find. Damn, I thought I'd been on the right track. What was I going to tell Miss Albright? I took out my phone and began dialing Brian's number.
Who are you calling?
The manager asked from behind me.
A colleague at the precinct,
I said, remembering to keep up my false identity.
I was afraid of that.
I turned to ask what he meant, but in a split second, all I saw was a blur of motion followed by a sharp pain in my forehead. I vaguely felt my knees giving out, but after that, everything faded to darkness. Something was hitting my cheek, rousing me from unconsciousness.
Rise and shine, detective,
A voice with a menacing edge sang to me. My eyelids fluttered open, only for my head to be slammed with rolling waves of pain. Each heartbeat felt like it was echoing through my skull. I tried to raise my hands to feel the burning pain from the side of my head, but something around my wrists stopped me. I blinked blearily at them. Handcuffs. Why was I wearing handcuffs? Water splashed into my face, and I sputtered and coughed as my senses returned. I shook some of the water out of my face and got my first good look at the person who'd spoken earlier. It was the building manager, or the person I had assumed was the building manager.
You're Matthew Thomas,
I said, though my voice was hoarse and weak.
Yes, good,
He said.
I was worried I'd hit you too hard and you'd forget. That wouldn't have been any fun. What's your real name?
I asked.
Oh, come on, Mr. Private Detective. I'm not going to tell you that. You can call me Stitch, I suppose.
So, he really was the Stitcher. I'd already guessed that, but the confirmation sent a chill down my spine. I was sitting in a musty basement, but Stitch had clearly added his own personal touches, like a surveillance system of the entire building and some furnishings. I could see an oil drum and surgical tools. Shit. The chair I was handcuffed to was metal, but I tried with all my might to stand up and break free. That was when I realized both of my legs were cuffed to the chair as well. I toppled over in a heap. Stitch laughed and said,
Now, if I help you up, do you promise not to try that again?
I molded over and said,
Yes.
through gritted teeth. The bastard was toying with me. He chuckled and hefted me off the ground and back into a sitting position. I thought about trying to bite his arm, but what would that accomplish? There was a buzz from the table on which all of the security monitors were sitting.
This Brian guy is sure worried about you,
Stitch said, glancing at the text. He started reading my messages in a mocking tone.
We're here. Where are you? Text me back. If you don't tell me where you are right now, I'm going to call your wife and tell her you're missing. Ooh, here's one from your wife, I think. Brian's worried about you, and so am I. Call me as soon as you see this.
On the monitors, I saw two people rush through the lobby and head straight for the elevators, probably Brian and Williams. Stitch was reading the messages as if they had only just come in. Brian hadn't been far behind me, so if that was him on the monitors, I hadn't been out for long.
We're still in the apartment building,
I said. Stitch turned to me with a raised eyebrow and grin.
Not bad, detective. Yes, we're still in the building. Scream if you like. They won't hear you. I've had the opportunity for extensive testing of the soundproofing. They'll find this room, you know. In time, maybe. I'll be long gone by then,
Stitch said, shrugging before his smile widened so much that I thought his jaw was going to unhinge.
So will you.
Not good. I had to stall him, get him talking.
How did you kill Maggie Albright? Oh, Maggie,
he said, almost wistful.
I wish I could have been there. The second I saw her, I knew that she'd look magnificent as one of my dolls. I was saving her for a special occasion, but I guess it was a mistake to send her the letters. That's how you found me, right?
I said nothing and simply glared at him, flexing at my restraints when I thought he wasn't looking, searching for any sign of give in them.
As far as how, it's a bit of a mystery to me as well.
Stitch reached into his pocket and withdrew a small metal tin, no larger than a wallet. Inside was a needle, set in a little velvet lining. In a similar depression was a spool of thread. The object had clearly been custom-made, and Stitch held it with a sort of sickening reverence. He stroked the needle with his pinky. Oh, the things this needle can do. I'm very grateful to whoever gave it to me and returned it after Maggie. But that's enough tell, I think. It's time for show. The wheels were churning in my head, and I was struggling to process the new information. Stitch was implying he had remotely killed Maggie, but that someone else had recovered the needle and given it back to him? Did Stitch have an accomplice? As much as I tried to stay rational and calm, I couldn't focus on those questions, not when Stitch was staring at me with those ravenous eyes. You'll be my first man, Detective. Not usually my style, but I should reward you for coming all this way. If you hurt me, you'll live to regret it. You're brave to threaten me in your position. Most people beg for their lives. But not to worry, Detective. I'm not going to hurt you. You're going to hurt you. Before I could ask what he meant, Stitch pulled the needle out of the tin, as well as the spool of thread. With careful reverence, he unspooled some and threaded it through the eye of the needle. Shit, he's going to do it. He's going to stitch me up like he did his other victims. Well, I'm not going to make it easy for him. I resolved to bite and squirm and throw myself to the floor and do anything it took to resist him. Open your hand, Detective. My eyes narrowed, and I tightened my fists. He wouldn't be getting an ounce of cooperation from me. Oh, really now? What's the point of this? Stitch said. I already said I wasn't going to harm you. I'm simply going to place this needle into your hand. What you do after that is your decision. Pick the cuffs, try to stab me. I truly don't care. At the very least, you'll have taken possession of my tool. I'd hardly kill you without it, would I? We serial killers are very particular like that. Stitch sure didn't mind a monologue. Maggie had stitched herself. If I touched the needle, would I do the same? Although I didn't have any solid evidence, my working theory was that Stitch had somehow drugged her and used psychological conditioning to compel her to use the needle on herself. Despite the throbbing pain of my head wound, I felt clear, sharp. I hadn't been drugged, and Stitch hadn't had time to condition me. I opened my right hand. Stitch's face disfigured into a horrific smile as he dropped the needle onto my palm. The second it did, my hand involuntarily closed and started to tug at the handcuffs. My other hand tried to get free as well, then my legs. I couldn't control my limbs. What? What did you do? I yelled as my right hand started trying to yank itself through the handcuffs. Stitch only smiled wider, watching with open fascination. Through the pain, I felt something warm and wet on my hands. Blood. I'd pulled so hard I'd drawn blood. Trying a new tactic, my fist lined itself up against the cuffs and no! Pulled. Hard. I heard something snap, my thumb bone probably, and I let out a scream. Lubricated by the blood and the new flexibility of my broken thumb, my hand slid out from the handcuffs. I tried to reach out and punch Stitch or free myself, but no matter how I commanded my body, it was no use. Instead, my hand drew the needle closer and closer to my mouth. I tried to at least struggle, move my head out of the way, but it seemed like only my voice remained my own. The needle lined itself up with the corner of my mouth and wasted no time piercing the skin there. It was much worse than a typical doctor's injection. Not just because the needle was a hell of a lot thicker than a syringe, but also because it had to go through my skin. And it didn't stop with just one prick. Not waiting for me to catch my breath, my hand moved with a precision I didn't think I had, slicing downward, gashing through my lips. Each time I cried out, it only worsened the pain, pulling at the thread running through my face. Blood started to fill my mouth, but I couldn't even lean forward to let it drain out. Instead, I had to cough it out, sending waves of pain across my face. I thought it would never end. Each piercing of the needle was an escalating torture, and with my mouth sewn shut, I couldn't even scream. It was a sick kind of relief when my mouth was finally fully stitched. At least it was over. No. Oh God, no. In the rush, pain, and terror, I'd forgotten that the stitcher doesn't just stitch your mouth. The needle hadn't paused. My hand was guiding it up and up toward my right eye. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a pained moan. I renewed my efforts to resist, but it still had no effect.
This is my favorite part,
Stitch said. I glared at him, trying to look defiant and proud, but with blood pouring down my face and tear tracks under my eyes, I doubted it landed. The needle pierced through the skin of my eye socket and into the soft tissue of my eye. I screamed and screamed, praying for the torture to end. By the time it was finished, my face was covered in blood, sweat, and tears, and both of my eyes were sewn shut. I was crying, sitting there in the darkness, my whole body shaking and shivering.
That was great,
Stitch said, though his voice sounded far away, like it was coming through a closed window. Try as I might, I couldn't focus on it.
You actually stayed conscious the whole time. Maybe I should do more men.
I heard him walk over to me and retrieve the needle, which was hanging off the side of my face, still attached to the thread sewn through my left eye. He then stroked the side of my face and kissed my forehead. I have to go. I'll check on you after it's all over, my beautiful doll. He got up and walked somewhere. I heard a door creak open, then shut. That echoing slam was the last thing I ever heard. SCP-1034 consists of a rusted, semicircular suture needle 5 centimeters in cord length and a spool consisting of twine approximately 1 millimeter thick. If the thread is removed from the needle, a second spool appears with the end of the twine threaded through the eye of SCP-1034. This only occurs when the needle is not under direct or recorded observation. When the skin or blood of a human, hereby referred to as the subject, makes contact with SCP-1034, the subject loses control of all voluntary bodily functions except facial muscles, lungs, and vocal cords. The subject then begins suturing all facial orifices, beginning with the mouth and progressing to the eyes, ears, and nose. The sutures are loose enough for the subject to breathe through his or her mouth and remain conscious during the entire process. After the process is completed, the subject returns SCP-1034 to the location where contact was first made and remains in a sitting or standing position corresponding to the original position of the subject. The subject then begins to perspire until all moisture has been exuded from the body. If death has not already occurred, the subject dies of dehydration during this period. When handled with gloves or some other barrier between the skin and the needle, the effects of SCP-1034 do not manifest. If the needle has penetrated the epidermal layer of the skin, the effects of SCP-1034 remain active until all blood has been removed from the needle. To hear more stories like this, be sure to hit subscribe and turn notifications on. I'll see you in the next one.